So I jumped. There we go. There we go. Ladies and gentlemen, those who know me know I'm not. Seattle Mariners. And I just want to welcome everyone to Rainier Avenue, Juan on Rainier, on your community radio station, Rainier Avenue Radio.world. And I'm really excited. I'm really excited because I am a big fan of people who do radio and people who do talk and really take on different perspectives. And I'm so glad that Jonathan Cho, I have to give him all the credit for introducing us. And today's guest is no stranger. You've seen her on Fox Television when she was on the Channel 13 affiliate. And then she got out of the media racket and she decided to go on her own. And this is Brandi Kruse. Brandi, welcome.
I'm excited to be here. Still in the media racket, I guess. Just a different arm of the media racket.
Tell me about that decision.
Yeah.
I remember when you made that decision. And that's been, what, 4 years ago now?
Gosh, will it be 4? Yes, it'll be 4 years in a couple weeks.
And you were so unique in Seattle media. For those that followed her on KCPQ and Channel 13, and you always had such an interesting and unique style that was all your own. And then all of a sudden you were, and the Jonathan and Tony, when they were here, they were talking about that awesome business that television and radio can be, and some of the things that go along with it. But then all of a sudden, we read you're picking up and you're doing your own thing. Tell us how you came to that decision.
It's weird because I never planned on it. I think there were a couple things that were coalescing at the same time because I loved my job at Fox. I really did, and I have a lot of complaints about mainstream news as it exists today, but I had a lot of latitude. I had a long leash at Fox. I had a great news director named Erica Hill who trusted me, who didn't lord over me. And so I got to do in-depth stuff, which was really unique to that. I got to host a show. So there was a couple things happening. There was a change of management at the onset of the pandemic. Wasn't a fan of the new management. My favorite news director had moved down to LA to be in charge of the Fox affiliate down there. And at the same time, we had these two, big stories that were happening, and I wasn't happy with how we were covering either of them. I wasn't pleased with our coverage of the pandemic. I didn't think we were doing our duty to citizens to really hold people in positions of power accountable for decisions they were making, whether we agreed with those decisions or not. And then the summer of 2020 was a big disappointment for me in terms of what I really felt like was the downplaying of political unrest and violence across the country, because it was being done in the name of racial justice. So I really felt like there was a soft brush being used to paint that summer. So I was growing increasingly disenfranchised with what the legacy media had become, with our coverage of things. And then also at the same time, we were doing the morning news from our homes. We were doing something that we never would have imagined even possible, that we could put on a whole news production from our kitchens and our living rooms. And so it opened my eyes to the possibilities of what could be done outside a fully functional news setting. And so all of those things really coalesced in a decision to try independent media out. And it was definitely a big gamble for sure.
It certainly is a gamble, but let me go back to the traditional media for a second. And I remember when you came to Seattle, and you reference it. And it's one of the cool things about watching you reference yourself in a very funny way. And you were a little bigger. You had a little.
Well, not when I came here.
Okay, tell me how.
When I came here, I was. Gosh, we're already bringing up my weight. No, that's fine. When I came here, I was 21. I was actually pretty small.
Only you, I feel comfortable going into this.
When I came here, I was pretty small. I gained weight when I left TV news.
Okay.
Yes, and that was because of the pandemic.
Let me ask you this, and I was telling you earlier. I'm trying to segue into this in regards to females in the media.
Yeah, sure.
And how it just in terms of that whole aspect, in terms of how you're supposed to appear, how you're supposed to look. and tell us how you dealt with all of that in terms
Sure.
of trying to be someone who's trying to present the media, but yet there's so much that comes along with that position.
Yeah, I mean, well, I never wanted to be in TV. I went to college for broadcast journalism with a radio emphasis. And so when I came to Seattle, I was a radio news reporter. I spent 3 years covering crime and justice for Cairo Radio. So that's the CBS radio affiliate. And so the look element of it, I mean, I had longer blonde hair than I do right now. Similar style, but it was very long. And I just, got this offer in TV to go across the lake and work for Fox13. And one of the first things I asked is, are you going to make me cut my hair because it's too, long and whatever it is? And at first they said no, but then, a couple weeks in, they chopped my hair to a bob and and so I rocked the bob, and it had been very blonde, and they made it less blonde. And because I was covering serious stuff. And I think their thought was, people can't take you as seriously with this long, voluptuous blonde hair. So that was a little odd to me, but I had a very unique style. People will say it was a little goth. It wasn't goth. I was just pale. And I wore black a lot. I wasn't goth, but I had, a style that was a little atypical for TV. And then, I was not the skinniest person on TV. I don't think I was big though. And,
I am big.
There's a lot of pressures on a woman in that setting. I mean, and you get so many comments about your looks and, your mascara is clumpy today. Are you pregnant? All these things, and you're trying to be a serious journalist. So for women, looks on TV is definitely much more. But I did balloon up during the pandemic. So you are fair to point that out. I gained like 40 pounds in a year. But I've lost it now. So we're back to normal.
I've gained 42 and I haven't lost any of it. This is Brandi Kruse, and she is on Juan on Rainier, on your community radio station, Rainier Avenue Radio.world. And I'm so glad I could bring up stuff like this with you.
Oh, yeah, you're fine.
It's so interesting just getting to, and this is the first time we've ever met.
Yeah.
And it's number one, it's a pleasure to meet you. The way that you come across on TV and sometimes on your radio show, and you come across and you and Nicole are great, because I love the when I watch on some of the episodes you guys do on the YouTube channel. I love your interplay because you do smile and laugh. But there's sometimes there's gonna be a little serious edge to you.
Yeah.
And I felt like at Q13 when I would watch you, that you never got to see the more expressive side.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think, and I always make sure that people understand this. And labels are weird, but, I was a investigative journalist, I did political journalism, and I do my opinion now. And so there is that element of, that expressiveness that you see on my show now comes with my deeply held opinions and beliefs that I'm now free to sort of express in a more unconstrained way. People always said I was way too serious at Fox13, that they never saw me smile. That was my most common email is, why don't you ever smile? And I used to hate those emails. But I kind of get the point of it now. I was a little glum, and that's not really who I am. I love to joke around. And with our show now, I think it's a necessity in the political climate and news climate that we're in to make sure that the show is fun and has those moments that, we have serious moments as well. But I think it's important to have both, because or else people are going to stop watching because they're going to be so damn depressed by the end of the show every day. We do roughly about 6 hours of live, political analysis really every single day. So it's a good balance between having fun with the absurdity of it all. And then also when the moment calls for it, making sure that people understand, the seriousness of a situation, what I think is at stake and how I feel about it.
What has happened to traditional media?
Well, there's a couple things. Some of it's nefarious, some of it's not. Some of it's baked in, some of it's not, and some of it can be fixed. One of the things that's happening that there's no doubt is the money's drying up. And that's because the ratings aren't as good as they once were, because there's this proliferation of other options for people. So it really is the older generation that is, I think, married to the idea of traditional TV and turning on, Channel 5 or Channel 4 and getting the news and the weather. And I hate to be crass about it, but the generation that's reliant on traditional forms of media is going to die off in the not so distant future, right? And so for the outlets that have not kept up with the changing way people consume media, they're getting a smaller piece of the pie. They're not figuring out really how to monetize. They're so reliant still on ratings, traditional ratings to sell advertising, and you just can't be. So that's happening. Proliferation of independent outlets. But there's also a realization from a lot of Americans that the legacy media does not serve about half the country. And certainly there's, Fox News, I'm not saying there's no mainstream outlets that aren't conservative. Clearly Fox News is biased toward conservatives in the same way MSNBC is biased toward the left. But overall, it's no doubt that the legacy media favors Democrats. I always tell people it's kind of like the way they all approach stories is if a Republican did something, they automatically assume it's bad. And then they work backward from there. If a Democrat did something, they automatically cover it as if it's good, and then they work backward from there. So I think there's been a realization of it.
Would you say that is historical? Would you say that is this something that was done early to drive ratings, or do you feel that people are allowed to bring their biases into the stories that they get to cover?
I think it's more apparent in social media. Also, social media allows people. There's so much more content. It's not the days where there was like one evening newscast and one morning show, and it was very tightly sort of restricted. There's so much content. You get to look at the networks. They're filling 24 hours with a lot of conversations and panels, and people are more free to. So I don't know. I can't tell you if in the 50s and 60s and 70s it was as biased as it is today, simply because I wasn't living in it and I wasn't consuming it the way that I am now. But I think it's gotten much worse. And some of that probably is ratings driven, but a lot of it is just baked in bias. A lot of the people we have working in our legacy newsrooms are liberals, and whether they're willing to acknowledge that or not, it is factoring into their coverage. And their coverage of Donald Trump is a great example of that.
Are you a conservative? Are you personally a conservative?
So I struggle with that label. I think people in Seattle would refer to me as a conservative, and I wouldn't necessarily be offended by it anymore. So I first and foremost am an independent. I do not like the two-party system. I think it's toxic for our country. So I will always be an independent. I will never identify with an organized political party, and you can put money on that. That's just a personal preference. Am I conservative for Seattle? Absolutely. People like to call me right wing in Seattle, which I find funny. But then you look at what makes somebody conservative or liberal. On most of, if not all of the social issues, I would be considered liberal. I've always believed in gay marriage. I've always been pro-choice. So those two things are two fundamental things that used to put people in the liberal or conservative category. I am of the belief that I want people to have more freedom, not less. And I want them to be less constrained by the government. So I want the government to take less money from them. I want the government to have less control over their lives. And I want the government to give them less things. I think that's the idea of freedom. I don't think you can get freebies from the government and call yourself free. So whether that makes me a conservative, I don't know. If people in Seattle want to call me right wing, fine. I tend to think that I'm pretty moderate. And I think common sense, public safety is the issue that progressives here have failed on to a point that I think has pushed me a little toward the right. But yeah, whether you want to call me conservative, I don't think it's an unfair label. But I think in another part of the country, I might be called a liberal, honestly. So
take us through that. Where are you from originally?
Minnesota. So I'm from outside of Minnesota, a small town outside of, or rather Fargo, North Dakota. So I usually just tell people Fargo because everybody kind of knows from the shows where that is. And I grew up so close to there. So from the Midwest, went to college at the University of Nebraska, go Cornhuskers, moved to New York City briefly after college to work at CBS, really low level job at CBS News.
Did you always know you were going to be a journalist?
I wanted since the 6th grade.
Really?
That was I've talked about it a little bit. I had a really dysfunctional home life. My dad was an alcoholic and a drug addict, and he suffered from a mood disorder. So we had a lot of knockdown, drag out nights at my home. But for some reason, we always watched the evening news. We always watched the CBS evening news. So it could be like borderline, need to call the police, domestic violence situation. And then it would be like half-hour timeout. So I think in reflecting on it, I think a younger me really saw that as an escape for me from that life and from that world. We didn't have a lot of money. And so I decided, I quit basketball. I quit some of the sports I liked to join speech and debate. And I just told myself, because I would watch at the time, the beginning of the Operation Enduring Freedom. And it was after 9/11 around that time and the war beginning. And so a lot of these people I'd see on the news as a sixth grader were war correspondents. So I really wanted to be a war correspondent because I felt like if I could be there, I wouldn't have to be here. And so that's sort of what I set out to try to do, is just I didn't end up being a war correspondent unless you count Portland. Isn't that a war zone? Isn't that what the president says? I was there a couple weeks ago. So maybe I finally fulfilled my childhood dream of being a war correspondent. But I got to do news. And I think that's, something I set out to do when I was really young and have got to do it. It was cool.
So was that Dan Rather, CBS News?
I think I'm not. I think it's around the cusp. It was around the time Katie Couric took over the CBS Evening News, I believe, and then whoever came right before Katie Couric, who I can't recall who that was. Maybe it was Dan Rather. Nah, now you're asking me to go back. I don't know.
No, it's really interesting. I always struggled in English class. I was and in the struggles, I was too lazy to write papers and everything. Yeah. So I would. A professor at Yale University had me come and talk, and he was really shocked when I said this. But I listened to Dan Rather, and that's how I really learned how to kind of refine my English.
Yeah,
I feel that there was value in listening to the news. Didn't understand all the issues when I was younger, but I sat down and I understood what a complete sentence was. I understood where to stop a sentence, where a period should go, and really took from that. And it's amazing. I thought that we watched the evening news around the dinner table. And we would sit there and look at the stories and hear, and I just really feel that there was a kind of a from that standpoint. And when you were talking about traditional media earlier, how that was a way that it was certainly entertainment, but for the most part, you could trust what you were watching.
Well, I would love to talk about just the importance for any young people of learning how to speak. What you just articulated, to me, it's the single best skill I've ever learned. It has been the single most lucrative skill I've ever learned, the single best skill for social environments, professional, personal. I just tell every kid is if you can take a speech and debate class, if you can join the speech and debate club, it will pay dividends that nothing else you ever do in your educational career will ever pay for you. So that's just because the importance of that for you, super important for me. But when you talk about the evening news and we thought we could trust what we hear, I don't know, maybe we couldn't. I mean, if we went back and analyzed some of that, but then you get the news now, but then you can go online and get these other interpretations of the news and the information that you're given. So
she is Brandi Kruse. She is I guess I call her social media journalist. She has her YouTube station, and she has a rather exclusive and extensive following here in the Pacific Northwest. And she says that she may be a conservative, at least when she comes to Seattle, she is. And she is right here with us on your community radio station, Rainier Avenue Radio.world, where we will have sports for you Thursday night. I believe the O'Day Fighting Irish are taking on the Ballard Beavers, but we're not going to talk about that, right? That was a month ago, ladies and gentlemen. So my mind is already thinking about the emails that were sent out this morning. So I'm a month off. So let's go back to late October when this airs. So now you're done at the University of Nebraska. Yep. You're a Cornhusker.
Yeah.
And wearing the is that when they wear crimson or they wear red?
It's a red. It's a red.
And how was
Go
that?
Big Red. Yeah.
Then your major was journalism?
Majored in journalism, minor in political science, minor in something else. It might have been Spanish. I can't remember, and I can't speak it well enough, so maybe I didn't finish my minor in Spanish. So I went there, loved it. It was a great journalism school. One of the funny things that I always talk about, I don't think people need to go to journalism school, first of all. I think that was probably a wasted major. I really believe that the best journalists are people who have an area of expertise and specialty that they can then segue into a journalism career, those niche things. So if I could go back and do it again, I wouldn't have gotten a major. I think you either have the qualities of someone who can be a good journalist or you don't. Are you curious? Are you independent-minded? And there's a presentation element as well. Can you speak well? Can you communicate a thought? Can you write well? And all of those things. But yeah, if I could go back, I probably wouldn't pay as much as I had to pay for out-of-state tuition at the University of Nebraska to go do that. But loved it. And then had a little entry-level job at CBS News, like a grunt job. Could not survive in New York City on that salary. And so got a job offer to come to Seattle and do the news here. And
where were you living in the city?
I was on the Upper West Side. I rented a bedroom from an older woman who was still in her 70s, a struggling actress. And her claim to fame was one appearance, a cameo on an episode of Law and Order. I think it was just the regular Law and Order. And she used to play it on repeat on a little VHS in the living room. And she'd played it so many times that her 3-second cameo would sort of jolt when you got to it, because the old VHSs, if you watched it too much, it would sort of jolt. It was the quintessential New York City experience for a young woman, and I'm glad I lived it. But
tell me about living in New York City at that time. How does that shape Brandi Kruse in terms of her career, her perceptions of things? Because New York City is such an interesting place.
I think it's this, it's the dream, right? And especially for people who want to be in news, to be in New York City. And so I think I had to live it. I think a lot of people want to live it. And I could have maybe stayed there and grinded it out, but like I couldn't even afford to eat. I mean, when I tell you, I would go to this little because I didn't have any family money to really fund this sort of New York City adventure. I had a professor actually who had offered to help me out financially a little bit to try to make the job at CBS work off the bat. But I would go to this little window in Times Square, and I bet you can still find this window today where you can get $1 slice of pizza. So I would go on my way to work, and then at like 10 a.m. as soon as it opened, I'd get 1 slice of pizza. And then on my way home, I'd get a second slice. And like, this is what I was eating every day, because it was $2 basically to feed myself every day. So I don't know. I mean, I think New York gives you, especially for a girl from the Midwest, this thrust into the real world and sort of this melting pot and the busyness of a city and all these things that was important for me to experience given where I came from. So
tell us about going from New York, then you came to Seattle directly.
Yeah, that's
a shift.
I had never been here. So they flew me out one day for an interview. And I still remember, like, I stayed they put me up at the Olive 8, the Hyatt Olive 8 downtown.
Was that 13 that did it? 13 that did that?
No, I was Cairo Radio. So CBS radio affiliate. So they brought me out, did a quick thing. And at that point, I was very set. I was almost like, I don't care if I hate it there, I'm going to take the job. But I came out one night, talked to them, and then, drove all the way from New York back home to North Dakota, and then North Dakota into Seattle. And at the time, I would argue it's changed a lot. The bones are still good, but Seattle was a much different city at the time I moved here in 2011. Still one of the most beautiful places I've ever been on earth, although it's gotten more challenged since then.
Did you have any idea about the politics and history of the politics here? Or
I consider myself, I was very, very far left at the time. Right. I mean, I voted for Hillary Clinton. I voted for Barack Obama twice. I voted for Hillary Clinton. I was a young woman in America. I mean, I think most young women in America, grow up, start liberal, and maybe go right from there. But so I was aware, but it didn't bother me at the time, because I think I agreed with a lot of that ideology fundamentally. But Seattle also wasn't as far left then as it is now.
No, it's definitely changed in that time frame.
Tell
us about the job at Cairo Radio, and tell us again the start and the progression, because suddenly, about 6 years later, you're on.
Not even, 3, I think. So I spent 3 or 4 years at Cairo Radio. I was doing investigative reporting, crime and social justice. So I spent a lot of days in the courtrooms covering trials. I spent a lot of time, first appearances and covering crimes that happened overnight. And I spent a lot of time covering protests and riots. I always joke with people that my career in Seattle was sort of defined by being a professional protest coverer, because it was nonstop. I mean, started with the Occupy movement. And then it went into the annual May Days that we would cover, and that continued into my time in TV. But I had been working there for 3-4 years, felt like it was time for me to leave, that I'd sort of gotten everything out of that job that it could give me. And then a news director across the street said, "Hey, you want to try TV?" And I said, "Sure. Are you going to show me how to do my makeup and teach me?" She's like, "We'll teach you everything, And so I went there, and I started by covering crime and justice. And then around 2015, when Donald Trump started running for president and everybody started all of a sudden being obsessed with politics, I transitioned into covering politics for Fox13 full time.
But even at the local level here in Seattle, I mean, it was such an interesting time. When
it was
from Michael McGinn.
Yes.
Michael McGinn to
McShwin. Yes.
And then we had a little conglomeration of mayors before we got to. We went to Ed Murray, and then Ed Murray, and then a little conglomeration of mayors. Then we go to Jenny Durkin, all of that. I mean, a lot of things really changed on the City Hall as well.
Yes, and I covered a lot of that. I was very well sourced at City Hall. We broke a lot of stories on McGinn and on Ed Murray, and of course the scandal that ended up with him leaving office. And then Mayor Durkin, I think her time is really defined by the summer of 2020 and the response to that. And she decides one term and I'm out of here. And she by today's standards even, she was very moderate. And it's funny how quickly the idea of what sort of a moderate progressive or Democrat looks like in Seattle, it has changed. Because if we went back, I'm sure they'd consider Ed Murray now, they'd call him, they always call anybody they don't like right wing, right? So I'm sure he'd be right wing, far too conservative for Seattle.
Is there a way that they're expecting you to cover the news? Is that one of the things to say in terms of, because I personally at Fox, at CBS, because I kind of hear this, like, you want to kind of be an independent person who kind of sees these things and speaks to them as you see them. Is there someone? Is it an editor? Is there someone that is saying, we kind of want to massage a story this way? How does that happen in the newsroom?
So I get this question more than any other question. Were you told what to say or directed what to say? I can say honestly for myself, I really did not have any babysitters at Fox13. I didn't, and changing in management made me change that. But for most of the time I was there, I never felt like pressure was being put on me to cover a story in a certain way. That being said, one of the most problematic things that happens in newsrooms in a city like this, where you're vilified so much if you sort of step out of line, is self-censorship. During the pandemic, I think there are stories that I probably wouldn't even bring up in an editorial meeting about the pandemic and vaxxing and all that, because it would just be not well received. So I think it's almost censorship that happens under a weight of pressure and concern over how that might be received in a newsroom. Because around the newsroom, there was this immense sentiment, and even from our anchors, and I'd asked them often not to say these things out loud, but they were very vitriolic toward people who didn't want to get a vaccine. Just talk in the newsroom. Very vitriolic about people who wouldn't mask. Very vitriolic about the president, about Donald Trump. So you sensed there was an extreme bias within the newsroom behind the scenes, and that can have an effect on the collective, right? Where you're not approaching stories in a fair way because you're in this groupthink environment.
What is going to what do you think will happen ultimately to TV news? What do you?
Well, the networks will always exist in some form, and a lot of them are starting to go towards streaming services. Right. Most of the content we offer ends up in bits and pieces scattered online. So I don't know. I don't know that TV newsrooms locally can survive if they don't rapidly get away from Nielsen ratings as the predominant way that they sell advertising revenue. Now, whether they're going to collapse in the next 10 years, I don't think so. But you'll see younger reporters, because they're paying them like 50, 60 grand a year. And that means less experience, less institutional knowledge of the market when they cheap out like that, and ultimately a worse product on the air and a more biased product on the air.
But some cool relationships, because you and Jonathan Cho, and you have some really cool, it sounds like there's some really cool stories there as well. Yeah. As people who want to sit back and I would just try to as you're finding your way, the relations that you kind of pull together and develop. Yeah. This is Brandi Kruse, and she is here on Juan on Rainier, and we are so glad to have her. We're going to go to break. And we come back, we'll dig into a little politics too before we go along.
Love it.
Daniel?
Rainier Avenue Radio. Seattle's
Love food? Here's some storage tips to keep it fresh longer. Store cut fruits and vegetables in the fridge. Place in reusable containers. Keep bread in the freezer for longer storage. 40% of food in the U.S. goes uneaten. Save money, save food, save the planet. Visit Seattle Public Utilities for more tips.
1, 2, get down! What's up, big and little homies? This is Masvita Maraire, host of Seattle Sports Weekly on Rainier Avenue Radio.world, your one-stop shop for Seattle sports. We cover preps, we cover college, we cover pro, we cover it all. Huskies, Mariners, Seahawks, Garfield, South, Roosevelt, Metro, King County. This is where you want to listen to for all the sports that's happening in Seattle. Seattle Sports Weekly on Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
Tune in to Real Estate and Money every Tuesday afternoon from 2:30 to 3 here on Rainier Avenue Radio.world. Join your hosts, Violetta Strash with John L. Scott Kent North and Tina Lombard with Guaranteed Rate Affinity. They'll help you navigate the waters of our volatile real estate market and offer you some guidance on how to make your hard-earned money work to make your dreams come true. Learn about current trends, get tips on financial matters, and have fun, interactive discussions about your home inside and out. That's Real Estate and Money.
Sediment cleanup of the lower Duwamish River has begun. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the members of the Lower Duwamish Waterway Group, which includes King County, the City of Seattle, and Boeing, have begun sediment cleanup of the Lower Duwamish Waterfall Superfund site. This important environmental project will address sediment pollution and help restore the health of the Duwamish River. Starting in the waterway's upper reach, construction activities extend from the South 102nd Street Bridge down straight to the Duwamish Waterway Park. Over the next 3 years, in-water activities will occur from October to February, ending in February 2027. Visit ldwg.org to learn about the upper reach cleanup and sign up for email updates.
You know you can't get enough of Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
Who many of you know, she should be on Q13 Fox, and she's ventured out on her own, and she is reporting on stories and giving us an independent view of politics and stories throughout the Pacific Northwest and certainly here in the Seattle area. And we appreciate you taking time to come and visit us on Rainier Avenue.
Oh, of course. I was just saying how cool the block is out here. I walked up and there was like a quartet playing. I think it's more than a quartet because is that four? This
Quartet's
was like
cool.
a 7-piece.
Yeah.
I don't know what you call that, but it was cool.
It's just another day in South Seattle.
Yeah, no, it's nice.
We were we obviously want to touch on some politics.
Oh,
but
yeah, please.
Let's talk about and touch on the most recent trip you took to Portland. And I also want to come back. I also want to talk to the we'll come back and we'll talk about some of the stuff that happened this summer and all that you reported on. But tell us about Portland.
Yeah.
Tell us about what we're not seeing in Portland, and you felt the need to bring it to us.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of misinformation coming out of both sides about Portland, and it was just so sporadic and such different interpretations of what was going on. Like Trump was like, it's a war zone. And the Democrats were like, nothing's happening. It's a figment of your imagination. And so I was like, okay, let's go down. We did this special 48 hours in Portland. So I don't believe it's a war zone. I think that's hyperbole. One of the things I've had to learn about Donald Trump is you don't take everything he says literally or he'll drive you crazy. But the situation outside the ICE facility there, to me, is untenable. It's about 2 miles away from the city core, which is another sort of misnomer. It's not in downtown Portland. And it is kitty corner from an affordable housing complex. And those people have been terrorized night after night. I mean, some of them will say they support the protests. Others don't. The noise, the gas in the air has been unfortunate for them. And it ebbs and flows. Some nights there's virtually no one out there. There's kind of they have like it's an occupation. So they've got some tents where some are always there. But what happens is there's clashes when federal agents are trying to get vehicles in and out of the building. And the protesters won't move, so they come out in their full riot gear and they tell them to disperse. When they don't, sometimes they'll make arrests, sometimes they'll use pepper balls. It is untenable, though. It's been happening for 100-something days, and the city of Portland does not seem eager to put an end to it. Now, peaceful protest is one thing, but when it's night after night, sort of wreaking havoc on, even if it is a 2-block area of the city, it's unacceptable. It's just unacceptable. And so I don't believe that the National Guard should be sent in. I'm vehemently opposed to, despite what you read in the Seattle Times, which mischaracterized my position on this, I'm opposed to the use of military forces or National Guard forces against the will of a city for a law enforcement purpose. Now, the federal government has a right to protect federal agents and federal assets. If the city won't do it, they have a right to protect it. I don't believe they need troops in Portland to fulfill that mission. I think they can do it with the federal agents from the protective service they have on the ground. To me, the biggest war in Portland is the war of people dying on the streets in filth and squalor. I will say I haven't been very kind to Seattle on my show as of late, but after seeing downtown Portland, Seattle looks great. Downtown Portland is a depth of despair that Seattle thankfully has not reached yet. Blocks upon blocks of empty storefronts, human feces litter in the street. You take the worst parts of Seattle, 3rd and Pine, 12th and Jackson, and the most desolate parts of downtown Seattle, downtown Portland's essentially all that. It's horrible.
What happens in a community like that? Is it the lack of political leadership? Is it business leadership not stepping up and saying, hey, we need to have this cleaned up?
Well, yeah, I mean, they're totally in denial. I mean, and I'm talking about Portland now. Seattle has some of the same issues, although I don't think it's to the same degree, but it is still bad in Seattle. But seeing Portland just made me realize that maybe I should be grateful it's not that bad up here. So I think there's a couple things. People will blame the pandemic. Can I swear on this show?
Yes, you can.
Bullshit. That is such bullshit. All the political decisions that were being made leading up to the pandemic allowed for that environment to occur. You don't just have, because of a pandemic, healthy, thriving businesses that shutter and never come back and board up their windows. You don't board up a window because you're closed. You board up a window because it's been broken or because of a crime issue and it's not safe to have a freaking window there, right? So the excuse of the pandemic, especially in 2 states that doled out public charity and funds like nobody else, is ridiculous. So the hands off the drugs. I mean, essentially in Portland, an experiment with decriminalization of hard drugs. Terrible idea, stupid idea. The outcome of that is clear. And you now have people dying at levels that we've never had them dying before of fentanyl overdoses. It's ridiculous. The vilification of the police that was so a blanket vilification of the police. Not like, hey, we have some issues policing we need to deal with. We need to really get in and make sure that we fix these areas. No, blanket vilification of the police, defund the police. That has an effect. Portland's dealing with the same issue we were dealing with in Seattle of having too few patrol officers and no one wanting to become a police officer there. A lack of political will. When you look at the videos that the governor of Oregon put out in response to Donald Trump saying that the city, looked like a hellhole, she's picking and choosing a couple vibrant areas of the city and then cropping in the shots real close so you can't see the boarded up windows around her. And that's ridiculous. I mean, any leader who goes down there, a true leader, if I were to say how this situation should have been handled, Donald Trump should pick up the phone, call the mayor of Portland, the governor of Oregon, and say, look, the situation outside the ICE facility there is unacceptable. We need some assistance with that. And in exchange, how can we help you with what's happening downtown? Can we lend you, more DEA agents to really target the drug dealers? Can we do an infusion of resources to try to get businesses back on their feet? How can we help each other? Instead, everyone grandstands, no one problem solves, and leaders in Portland and Seattle blame Donald Trump for every single thing that ails their states and their cities. And it's unacceptable.
There is a historical connotation at times, especially with communities of color.
Sure.
The communities of color will tend to fear certainly the police, and then when you bring in the ICE and the conversation around bringing in federal groups of military action, there's always a tension that comes along with that.
Yeah.
And certainly in South and East Seattle, we see that tension, and we certainly have had our share of issues with the police department. And I know Sean Barnes has a lot to deal with here. I've had conversations with him about that in regards to how they can. And then you add on this element. First of all, in Portland, was that an issue there? Was there any conflation of issues? I don't know if I hadn't seen very much of the Black population involved or the Latino population.
Yeah, when you go down there, it's similar to Seattle. This is a bunch of woke, white, 20-something kids screaming social justice. And I'm not saying white people can't stand up for issues that they believe in, but I mean, it is telling, I think, to me, that whenever you have these moments of unrest, when I look at much of the violence and vandalism that occurred in the summer of 2020 in the name of racial justice, what color do you think the skin was of the people committing most of the acts of violence and vandalism that I witnessed with my own eyes?
I'm sure it was white people.
It was little white anarchist punks. I mean, and that is the reality. And these are anarchists in the sense that they just want everything to burn down. They will pick any issue, whether it was the Occupy movement, Amazon's evil, BLM, anti-ICE, yay Hamas. They'll pick any issue to go out there and break things and tear things down. They're not trying to lift communities up. They don't care. They're not interested. They care about anarchy. And are there some authentic voices in the mix? Sure, and that's fine. But they're drowned out by the real cuckoo for Cocoa Puff professional activists.
Here in Seattle, we and I know you've witnessed your share of interesting things.
Yeah.
I wish we said that was during the pandemic, but even recently.
Yeah.
And I know you had a couple of things that I saw this summer, and there was some. I believe you. I don't know if you would say you were attacked, but
yes, I was attacked. I was assaulted for a prolonged period of time outside an ICE facility in Tukwila, and an enraged activist tried to blind me with wasp killer in the eyes. So yes, I was attacked.
Are we taking some of these things too far? I mean, how do we describe what type of behavior is that?
I mean, that is antisocial, anarchist behavior that city leadership in Seattle has allowed to fester for too long, and it's gotten to the point where it's completely out of control. And that's the reality of it. I don't care if you want to commit an act of violence or vandalism. I don't care what you're doing it in the name of. There has been.
Oh, hang on one second. Someone is
speaking of violence. I'm sure. What bothers me is this: we have in the Pacific Northwest allowed a certain level of left-wing political violence to become a fact of life. We are somehow kind of accepting of people blocking freeways, blocking roadways, blocking the access to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, taking over the quad at the University of Washington, breaking windows downtown, taking over 6 square blocks of the city. And, the progressives tell them, well, it's in the name of, social justice or racial justice, or it's because there's what's happening in Gaza. Whenever you make an excuse for that kind of conduct, because maybe you agree tepidly with the issue that they're demonstrating over, you're allowing and excusing it. And that's really been one of the fundamental issues. Is there have been many mayors of Seattle. Governor Inslee famously said he hadn't heard of CHOP, 2 days after CHOP formed. Governor Bob Ferguson was absolutely nowhere to be found when cop cars were on fire in downtown Seattle in the summer of 2020. So to me, I genuinely could not care any less what you're out there protesting. Political violence and vandalism is unacceptable, and city leaders have allowed it to become a normal fact of life.
What could change it? I mean, would you like to? Should the mayor give the police a little bit more responsibility, a little bit more leeway, or
Yes.
the directive? Hey, you need to go in there and stop this crap.
Yeah, police have basically been neutered to deal with those things. When I was down outside the federal building in June, when they were kind of encircling it day after day to try to stop immigration proceedings from happening there, Seattle police were nowhere to be found. Until they started lighting off the protesters, these mortars in the streets, and then they'd come in and try to clear the area. And by that time, it was almost too late. So I think because there's no political will, police are very hamstrung. So there needs to be political will to make mass arrests when there's actual unrest. I'm not talking about peaceful demonstrators, but you don't have a right to take over the streets, stop people's free flow of movement for any cause. You don't have the right to do it. And I do think there need to be mass arrests in that regard, and then prosecution. For instance, my crew was mobbed at CHOP in the summer of 2020. We had to seek refuge in a fire station. No one was ever arrested for that. When I was assaulted at the ICE facility in Tukwila in June, one of those was a felony assault. No one was ever arrested. I made police reports. And so that's a real frustration.
No one got back to you on that, or
No, the Tukwila Police Department took my report. Okay. I think we had a little follow-up. But these people do such a good job hiding their face so that if you're not policing the area in the moment, it becomes very difficult after the fact to find them and track them down. I mean, look at people were killed at CHOP, not by police, by the people at CHOP who deemed themselves, warlords of CHOP with guns and stuff. And because police had totally abandoned that area, it made solving that crime, I think, incredibly difficult because it happened in this lawless zone. And police couldn't even one of the young men who was shot and killed, they couldn't even get to him right away to render aid. So it's a ridiculous allowance of anarchy that we have. And you can't have a functional, successful city when you allow for that.
Looking to have a functional city.
Yeah.
Brandi Kruse on your community radio station, Rainier Avenue Radio.world. She obviously was a local TV personality here and also on the radio. She was also on Q13. She now has on her own independent YouTube channel. You can find her, punch in Brandi Kruse. You can hear about some of the things that she talks about and her perceptions of the city of Seattle. And if you are looking for opportunities, we were coming up on the election here. Coming up shortly, Rainier Avenue Radio has become your community election connection. And so we have had a number of debates. We have had a number of opportunities where we have spoken to the candidates directly, and you can come on Rainier Avenue Radio and to the website, and you can find those interviews so you can be an informed voter. And that's your number one responsibility.
Yes.
And we encourage people to go sign up, get your documentation, and vote. Vote, and if you don't, you don't have a right to complain. And we know here on radio, we hear a lot of you complaining at times, and we want you to go to the polls and take all of your frustration out there. And the election's coming up here in a matter of days.
Well put. Take your frustration out and send your ballot, even if you have to really fill it in angrily. I like that.
You recently had the opportunity to meet with the President of the United States.
I did, yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I've had a complicated relationship with the president.
I want to say this about you, okay? Because a lot of people, you do have a complicated. It's kind of like the old Abraham Lincoln statement, right? When I do good, I feel good. When I do bad, I feel bad.
Yeah.
And this is my religion. When he does something that you appreciate, you say it.
Yeah.
When he does something that a lot of people who support him try to cover over, you don't. I mean, you're very, very critical at times.
Yeah.
Tell us.
Well, and people don't see that, right? Because I went to the White House to talk about Antifa, and I was so grateful to be able to do that. It happened out of nowhere. I like to tell people a bald eagle landed on the roof of my house on a Monday and dropped a note down my chimney that said, "You're cordially invited to the White House." But no, I got a phone call, said, "Do you want to be at the White House on Wednesday for a round table on Antifa?" I was like, gee, let me check my calendar. Yeah, I'll be there. But we weren't told the president would be there. So I only found out a couple hours beforehand that the president would be joining us at the round table. So a cool experience. I don't care what you think of the president, being at the White House and having an audience with the president on an issue you care about deeply, that you've been trying to get attention to, is quite the thing. I told this offhand joke to the president about I've been cured from my Trump derangement syndrome. And I joked that it's made me happier, healthier, and even more attractive. And I don't, of course, literally mean more attractive. I mean that when you're not filled with hate for someone, over anything, you just radiate, a more attractive demeanor. It was funny, though, the number of people who globbed onto that and said, "Oh, you're an ass kisser and a boot licker," who don't watch my show and know that, for instance, a week before that, I'd called for the resignation of Pam Bondi over her comments about free speech. And there she is sitting right in front of me. I'm like, I wonder if she saw my post about free speech. So, I mean, I used to have serious Trump derangement syndrome. I really disliked the man. And I kind of got over that, had an awakening, a red pilling, if you will, and ended up voting for him in 2024. So don't like everything he does, but I think he is doing a fantastic job, which I couldn't even have imagined saying 2 years ago, even. Yeah.
People who have a reflectionary response to him.
Yes, yeah.
And I guess some have labeled it TDS. He's labeled it TDS.
Yeah.
But people who have a reflectionary response to him,
Mm-hmm.
what would you say to him, given now that you've been back there, you've had a chance to talk to him?
Yeah, I mean, two things helped me when it came to the president. I stopped taking him literally. He says so many things. And if you take everything that comes out of his mouth literally, like he literally means it, then you'll go crazy. I mean, you'll just go crazy. And then I stopped taking the media seriously. So I really realized that there is nothing Trump can do that the media won't criticize. Even his peace deal in the Middle East, they were finding negative aspects of it almost immediately, where if a Democratic president had come to that, it would have been this glowing, profuse praise. And I really saw that from being in a mainstream media environment to coming out of it and being able to think a little more clearly. So to me, I just don't think it's here's what I know is going to happen, okay? And I have family members who let Trump's existence on this planet like ruin their lives. And it makes me so
I
sad.
think there's a lot of people.
There are. And look, he's going to be gone in 3 years. And then whoever the next Republican is, the media will automatically paint them as Trump 2.0, the reincarnation of Donald Trump, because now it works for them, right? When you see all the things that Democratic leadership here and elsewhere blame on Donald Trump, while they simultaneously ignore the crises that have plagued our cities and states that you cannot in any reasonable way blame on Donald Trump, you start to realize that he is the most effective scapegoat the Democrats have ever had. Look at how much Bob Ferguson and Attorney General Nick Brown obsess over Donald Trump. While our crime crisis has gotten worse, our drug crisis, our homeless crisis, taxation is out of control, the cost of living. So you start to see that, wait a second, they're relying on people's hate for Donald Trump to hide their own failures. And I think my question for people is, how long is that acceptable to you? How long is it acceptable for them to blame everything under the sun on Donald Trump while our own state suffers for reasons not of Donald Trump's doing? And to me, local politics matters much more than what's happening at the White House. And our local politics has been nothing short of a failure that's led to an existential crisis for our state.
Well, and we're going to touch on that. I just want to ask, what, how was it just to meet him? How was it to shake his hand?
Oh, it was great. He gave me a tap, his old signature, because he came over and he was shaking hands, but he grabbed mine and he said, "Great job, very good job." And then he gave me one of his old pats. And I was like, "Thank you, Mr. President." He was like a proud dad. And, I was like, oh, that was a nice moment. And yeah, it's cool to meet the president. It would have been cool to meet Biden. It would have been cool to be at the White House and to have that experience. And we also got a witness, by the way, the moment where Marco Rubio came in and wrote on a paper and informed the president that there was a peace deal in the Middle East. Wow. And we all knew something was happening, because out of the corner of my eye, behind the cameras, I saw the Secretary of State and the Vice President pacing in the hallway. They were pacing on their phones. I'm like, something is happening. And then Marco Rubio comes in and writes that note to the president. So to be able to be there for a moment like that was pretty cool too.
What do you think was accomplished in that particular meeting with him?
Well, I think, as I said during the meeting and to the White House press corps, it wasn't my goal going there to convince the American people that Antifa is real. Because the media just will not allow that label to be used. They're like, Antifa is sort of an idea. I just disagree. There's something called Rose City Antifa, which is sort of one of the first real organizations that had a structure and all of that. So I didn't care. I don't care what the public thinks, the media thinks. But what we did come to the conclusion of is the FBI is very interested in organizations that we've found that seem to be funding some of these activities or funneling money to organizations or events where acts of violence occur. And so the FBI has been following up pretty aggressively on some of the organizations that we've given them, some of them very mainstream organizations. I won't give you guys, I don't want you to be sued over organizations that I'll put on blast.
Thank you.
Some very mainstream organizations that I think are responsible for funding acts of, whether knowingly or unknowingly, groups committing acts of political violence in our state and elsewhere. So they're going after the money.
There is a very, very, very interesting political race going on here in the city of Seattle. It seems like this one has the mayor's race has kind of sucked the life out of I had a call from a city council candidate and said no one's following our race anymore. It has really come down to such an interesting race between our incumbent mayor, Bruce Harrell.
Yeah.
And
is that how you say his name?
That's
so fancy.
I say it differently than everybody else.
Oh yeah.
I think it may be Harrell. I think Tony has told me to call him Bruce Harrell. Okay. And the guys that grew up and went to school with him in the hood back at Garfield. I've always called him Bruce Harrell, and he's never corrected me.
Yeah.
And then Katie Wilson.
Yeah.
Who I guess they are certainly contrasting personalities. Okay.
Yes.
And she came on Juan on Rainier. We had a really interesting conversation. She's only stayed half the time. You stayed 27 minutes longer.
Oh. Okay.
But she stayed half the time. But she was very nice.
Yeah.
And we had a really good conversation. Very private, and just realized at the time that this was. I mean, her life definitely has changed.
Yeah. She kind of came out of nowhere and beat him in the primary. And it's just like, whoa.
What? Just for your thoughts. I mean, looking at incumbent mayor, who a lot of people feel he hasn't been that bad. But I mean, there's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack with Mayor Harrell, and certainly being challenged in this in almost the same way in New York and all this democratic socialist movement.
How honest do you want me to be?
I want you to be as honest as you can.
All right, because you have a little picture of him in the hallway that says his history in the city. I don't want to offend anybody. Whether he wins or loses will be 100% his responsibility. I don't think she really plays a factor in it, frankly. She might have, I find the Democratic Socialist base is very invigorated and they come out in the primary and it's hard to sort of add to that unless you're very impactful. I think people are voting for or against Bruce Harrell. I don't think they're voting for Katie Wilson. He's outside that Democratic Socialist thing. I have some real disappointments with Mayor Harrell, and I've covered him since his days on the city council. I've had some great in-depth interviews back when I was in mainstream news. In fact, he was the last interview I did before I left Fox13. The very last interview, we taped it. That was my last day, and it actually aired after I was no longer there. And that was a race about, running for mayor. He has disappointed me in the sense that I believe I know who he is. And I think who he is a good man. I think he cares about public safety. I think he's supportive of the police. I think he thinks some of the soft on crime policies are asinine. I think he feels like he can't be who he is and win. And that's a disappointing thing to me. I think that you should be who you are. And if you win, you deserve to win. If you don't, then you don't deserve to win. I feel like he will shed an exoskeleton and be whoever he feels he needs to be. And that's a mistake. The person he ran as is the person the city needs. And I don't think it's the person the city has ever gotten from him.
It's really interesting. The race that I think is very, very similar to that is Sarah Nelson versus Dion Foster.
Okay.
And the President City Council. And Sarah, she came to our debate. She did our show. Sarah doesn't run from anything. I mean, and in the debate, there were questions that were pointed around votes that she took, some very difficult votes. Dion Foster pointed out some very, very difficult things about her record. And she said, it was where the city needed to be. And I made those decisions. And she called me and I told Sarah, I said, you're probably going to wake up on November 5th and you're going to wish you'd run for mayor.
Yeah, maybe. But I agree with your assessment on Sarah. Sarah has really come into her own. I remember first interviewing her and she was very nervous and sort of awkward. Right. I was like, but she's really come into her own and she is willing to say what might not be popular. And if that allows her to win re-election, great. If not, then she doesn't deserve to win re-election. Because I think if you run as authentically yourself and what you believe, then people get to decide truly who they want in that position, as opposed to, you faking who you are. So I give her a lot of credit for taking some votes that she thought were in the best interests of the city. I was
on the staff of Gain County Executive Gary Locke way back when he was county executive in the middle 1990s. And it's just so interesting. No one, I haven't heard a lot of conversation about Claudia Balducci and Girmay Zahaleh. I have thoughts.
I like Girmay. I like him. He's a nice guy. In fact, he'd reached out to me in recent weeks and he's been on my show before. Claudia Balducci is someone who worries me because I feel like she can also blow with the wind. Who do I need to be today? But Girmay, his position on police defunding is unforgivable to me. He can come back from it. I'm always open to people changing their minds, but I cannot vote for him given his seeming support of dismantling the police. I can't vote for him over it. And I am a King County resident. So as much as I'm worried about Claudia, I think it's like, for me, what's the lesser of two, bad choices? So I'll be voting for Claudia, but, I don't think that they're too far off from one another, frankly.
This just the last question I will ask you, and once again, this is why I wish the show was so much longer.
Yeah.
But I just want to say, just get your thought. This summer in the primary, there was a lot of successful Democratic socialists, and they're sort of flexing their muscles. Some big wins too. When you think about the city attorney's race between Evans and Davidson.
That's going to be a disaster.
And Erica Evans is clearly way out in front of that one. Is this a sign of the times? Are things changing, or will we see a little bit a different view in the general election next week?
Well, the last election we saw the moderates late win, and then now it's like, the Democratic Socialists. I think a lot of that has to do with the national political climate, where people are so upset here about Donald Trump and what they deem as this extreme that they want to go in the other direction. And I think Ann might be a victim of that. I think Sarah might be a victim of that. I think Bruce might be a victim of that. So that's unfortunate. I really don't believe, Trump is deemed the poison pill for our states, more Republican or conservative candidates. And that's unfortunate because, we should be able to stand on our own and pick people not based on the president of the United States. So I feel like Trump is going to, unfortunately, create a difficult situation for any of the more moderate contenders in Seattle. But I don't think it's like now we're heading towards socialism. In 4 years, I'm sure whatever happens this year, it'll be the opposite. Yeah.
Brandi, we are fortunate that we have you. And we want to thank you so much for taking the time to come and visit us on Juan on Rainier.
Thank you for having me.
It was fun.
We shouldn't get too close together.
She's nice. She smiles.
Yeah.
And that's the.
I'm skinny.
She's skinny.
Thank you.
Those are the same things I said about Shabbos and Juan when which he was on, right?
Yeah. No.
Another conversation. Thank you. On your community radio station. Get out and vote next week.